it's worthwhile setting a little bit of context. I'm not even 100% sure you know exactly what my perception was when we met. But I had been invited up to give a talk internal to the company. They had been putting on a special day about like, how do you engage with consumers about things like GMOs and pesticides? And I was one of the people that was invited to come up and give a talk. And I gave a talk. And then I got the worst news of my life. And then I was on a panel.
Yes.
And the panel is now in front of everybody, whereas the talks were kind of smaller groups. Now it's everyone there. It's a whole bunch of my colleagues that I don't actually know very well. Like I know a few people in the room. But the context was a few months earlier, I had invited Jordan Peterson to the American Farm Bureau. And there were some people that from the outside of the company that really didn't like it. And so they wrote articles and they wrote to my boss and tried to get me fired and tried to say, why are you supporting somebody that is, the alt-right figurehead and espouses all these terrible things about women and about gay people and transsexuals, and which was nothing to do with what we were inviting him to come to talk to the Farm Bureau about. And the company had basically said, hey, things went sideways. We know you didn't try and bring this intention to the company. We would just prefer that you just don't talk about it too much. And so here I am at this panel. Everything's going along fine. We're having good conversation. And here's this little tiny woman sitting off to the right-hand side. And do you remember what you asked me about?
I asked how you managed. Basically, my question, the way that I remember it was, I wanted to get to the point of how do you handle a situation where people associate you with this idea that you're not necessarily at all tied to?
And my perception, the way that I heard it, was, why did you do this to us? And because I was not in my right mind. I had just received the worst news of my life. And here is this person that's sitting there. And I think I finished answering kind of garbled, and you came back and you wanted, like, we had like an interaction. And I am a little bit like, what the fuck? Like, clearly I'm not allowed to talk about this. I'm in front of executives at the company. But all right, I'll keep going. And then like we answered it and you were perfectly pleasant. Like I don't want to represent that you were anything other than respectful, but I was definitely like, come on, like what is going on here? And then the panel wraps up and there's always people that want to talk with you afterwards and you are waiting patiently. And then we go outside and I'm like, here we go. This is going to be a person that's going to try and pin me to the wall. And I've like, my perception of that was because there were people from the inside of the company that were supposedly my colleagues that were showing up at meetings and saying terrible things about me and trying to pin me down and to say like awful things. And there were meetings I wasn't allowed to go to. I mean, it was a mess for me. So I had not that far away from that bad thing. Then I had this day. Now you're sitting there waiting for me. And I am a little bit like, how am I going to handle this person professionally? Because she's going to beat me with a stick here in the hallway and try and really pin me down. Oh no. And I could not have been more wrong because you came up and you were like, I'm so interested in your life. I'm so interested in what you're talking about. This is really important to me. And it was one of the most earth-shattering moments of my life because I'm trying to fight back tears. And here's this person that's very earnest in like trying to learn more about me.
Yeah. Well, and so the reason that I sought you out because I saw all of your ability to communicate and how you were reaching out to groups outside of our company and outside of our industry to try to share our story. And moving into my new role, which is a commercial development breeder, I was going to be more customer facing. And so I was going to have to be out there telling our story and sharing why these products are valuable and why I believe in them. And I was wanting to know your perspective on standing up in front of a group and having them potentially not like something you say or something that your company does and having all of a sudden being, you are this because you're on the stage with this. And that's the way that I saw the Jordan Peterson thing. And I had seen the awful, awful comments and horrendous posts. And I could not believe that I was reading all of this about this person just being on the stage with somebody else. I mean, you got thrown under the bus beyond and driven over like 50 times. And I was heartbroken, to the fact that somebody would treat somebody else like that and not just walk down the hall and say, hey, can you explain this to me? And so I was approaching it as, help me understand, how did you manage that tension? Because you did it beautifully. And I feel like I can learn something from you. And at the same time, oh my gosh, why would anybody treat a human, somebody else like that? You can have differing opinions. I know there's a lot of people in the company that I have differing opinions with, but that doesn't mean that we can't get along, and I can have my differing opinion. You don't have to force yours down my throat and make me change my mind. And I feel like some people were like, you have to believe the same way I do, and if you do anything beyond this, then you're evil. That was not cool in my book.
Yeah, and I remember you being like, there were all these things written about you, and it doesn't match up with this is the person that you are. And now, in hindsight, looking back on that conversation, I'm like, oh, what a nice thing to say. But at the time, I was like, what are you trying to do to me up here? And I think it was that had been such a pivotal time in my life, because here I had been trying to do something that I thought was really important. So Jordan Peterson had been invited in because what I had said was, the farmers don't understand why people are angry with them, and they send their kids away to college, and one of two things is happening. And I heard this all the time from farmers. They would say to me, either I send my child away to school and they spend 4 years being told they're not allowed to do anything outside of the ag college because what their family is doing with their GMOs and their pesticides are evil and bad. So they get isolated over onto the ag campus, or they go away to college and they hear all these terrible things that are going on with the farms, and they become ideologically possessed, and they start thinking what my family is doing is wrong and bad, and I want to get rid of those values. So I thought, who better in the world than to talk to the farmers about this? So for me, it was like, everyone wins here. We're just going to have a really good conversation about how to prepare your children to face the storm that is life. And it went really sideways. Oh,
I think the perception went sideways. I think if you look at when I went back and watched the fireside chat, I was like, Vance is redirecting to get to the conversation at heart. And whether you like Jordan Peterson or not, I think he has some ideas and philosophies that you can think about how to be your best self and put forth effort and show up every day. I mean, those are good qualities, at least in my life. I think those are very valuable lessons. And I think people get turned off by some of his approach just because he does have a pointed way of speaking. But if you take the ideas out of the
tone.
Yes. And just take a step back and listen for a moment, you can learn so much from discussions like that. So
It was surprising to me because one of the ways that I got really good at my job was that I spent the first 6 months to a year learning about our company and about how our technology works. And then from then on, I was like, I've got that pretty well down. I mean, I stayed in touch with mentors and I had people teaching me. But for the most part, then what I did was I'm going to go read as many of my critics as I possibly can. I'm going to read the people like Vandana Shiva who think that Monsanto is the evil empire and that Indian farmers are killing themselves because of it. I'm going to read Nassim Taleb, who thinks that GMOs are could create a black swan event where everything breaks down because of it. Like I went through and thought, the most valuable thing you can do once you understand something is to go to find the people that don't understand it and listen to them to make sure they don't know something that you want to make sure that
you don't know something they do.
That they have knowledge that would be helpful to you. Yep. And so I was really given a firsthand education that a lot of people don't think that way. That a lot of people think if they have ideas that I don't agree with, the best thing I can do is destroy those ideas. And if I can't destroy those ideas, then I'm going to destroy the person and make it so that they have no quarter, that no one wants them around. And you know, when you and I actually spoke out in the hallway, you were only the second person that I didn't know that had heard about that situation that came up and talked to me. And like, from my perception, like there were people out there saying I was like a horrible racist and that I was a sexist and that I should be fired. People wrote the heads of the company to say that they wanted a public apology. And so I was not prepared to have this little person come outside and be like, I want to know more. But that began a really important friendship for me, because in tandem with that, then I'm dealing with all my terrible news. I see this person that gives me a form of kindness. And then I think I just dumped right on you. Like, this is what I'm going through right now.
Well, yeah. And to not share all of that, but I could see after I talked to you, I could see how much it affected you. I didn't know what was going on that day, but I could just see that there was something not right. And when you shared what had happened that day, I think I could relate, because the same thing happened in our lives. And we went through a very similar situation. And
I think for anybody that's wondering, I think anybody that's wondering about the bad news, it's just bad news that happens to families. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter what it was. Yeah. It was just unexpected, really bad news that like I wasn't prepared for. Yeah. I started the day off one way and it ended a totally different way. And that's all that needs to be said. But everyone has that in their life at some point. If you haven't had one, it's going to happen. And it's just the first time that it ever happened to me. Yeah.
You get a blow to your stomach and you're like, what? I thought we were on this trajectory. Now I have to rethink my trajectory. How do I comfort the family that's around me? And how do I process this at the same time? Because we're going to process all of this differently. And I think I could see all of that going on. And then you have the turmoil of work and everything. I could see all of that. And it was a good, I could learn from you on the things that you're excellent at. You're an excellent communicator and you have different ways of thinking about communicating. And I appreciated all of the little tips and tidbits and things that you would share. I'd make sure to listen and watch the podcast or whatever, read the manifest.
The Eco-Modernist Manifesto. Yeah.
Yes. Those are important things. To your point, I think we've talked about it before, but when a mentor or somebody suggests something to you, you need to follow through. Otherwise, your word is less valued. So if you want to start a relationship with somebody and ask them for feedback, you better do the homework. If they say, hey, check this out, it could be helpful in whatever if you're willing to spend that time and do the homework, that's going to put you in a different position, because you get a lot of feedback from 20 places, and putting the effort and time into shows that you value their opinion and you value the effort they're putting into you. And I think
100%. I mean, like my perception is if somebody comes up and says, hey, I randomly think you ought to read this book, you can blow that off. Yeah. But if you go to another person and you say, hey, I'm dealing with this problem, or I'm thinking about this thing, what do you think I should do? And they say, you should read this book. Guess what? You just signed up to read that book. Yep. And